On a cold winter morning, Barron Trump was walking slowly down the gray streets of New York City. His hands were stuffed deep into his pockets, trying to shield them from the sharp, biting chill that cut through his thick winter coat. The cold seemed to seep right through the fabric, no matter how thick the coat was. He could feel the icy wind against his face, and the frosty air stung his skin. Snowflakes danced through the air, swirling around him like delicate little stars. The sound of his boots crunching the snow underfoot was the only noise in the otherwise still city. The street lamps cast a pale yellow glow, illuminating the thick blanket of snow that covered the sidewalks, turning the city into a winter wonderland. The streets were empty, save for a few cars parked along the side of the road, their windows frosted over. The world around him was still, almost quiet, as though the city hadn't woken up yet. But Barron, in his own way, had already been awake for hours. He had always been a quiet soul, preferring to be alone with his thoughts, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Most of the time, he would wander through the streets early in the morning when the world was still asleep. He didn't mind the solitude. He liked the quiet, the time to reflect. But on this particular morning, something caught his attention. A shivering street dog was curled up on a piece of cardboard on the sidewalk. Its fur was matted with ice, and it looked so small and fragile in the vast, cold city. Barron stopped in his tracks and knelt down to take a closer look. The dog's eyes were wide with fear and sadness, and its nose was wet from the cold. It looked so lonely and vulnerable, a stark contrast to the towering buildings around it. Barron's heart went out to the animal. The dog was trembling, its little body struggling to stay warm in the freezing temperature. Barron could see that it had clearly been on the streets for some time. Its eyes held the kind of sadness that only a creature who had been abandoned and left to fend for itself could understand. "You've had a tough night, haven't you, buddy?" Barron whispered softly, his voice filled with sympathy. He reached out his hand slowly, making sure not to startle the dog. The animal flinched at first, but as Barron's hand came closer, it didn't pull away. Barron gently touched the dog's head, and it let out a soft whine, as if acknowledging his kindness. He felt a pang in his chest as he realized that this little creature, like so many others on the streets, had no one to care for it. Barron's eyes scanned the area. The street was deserted, and the wind howled through the empty roads. The city was waking up, but for this dog and many others like it, the world still seemed to be asleep. Barron knew he couldn't just walk away. There had to be something he could do to help. He unzipped his coat and pulled out his scarf, carefully wrapping it around the dog's shoulders. The warmth of the scarf was a small comfort, but it was better than nothing. Barron stayed there for a few moments, gently stroking the dog's fur, trying to calm it. "I can't just leave you here like this," he muttered to himself. "You deserve better." As he was about to stand up and leave, something caught his eye. A few feet away, a street cat was curled up beneath an abandoned storefront. It too was shivering in the cold, its fur matted and dirty. Barron's heart sank as he realized that the problem was bigger than just this one dog. All around the city, there were animals just like this, homeless, cold, and alone. The streets were filled with them, and Barron couldn't ignore their suffering anymore. It was in that moment that an idea sparked in his mind. He had seen a post on social media about a local animal shelter that helped street animals. Barron had always been passionate about animals, but he had never thought of doing something on such a large scale. He knew there were shelters out there, but they were few and far between. And many of them were underfunded and overcrowded. He thought, maybe he could do something about it. Maybe he could make a real difference not just for this dog and cat, but for every street animal in New York. The idea was a bold one, but Barron wasn't one to back down from a challenge. If he could help just a few animals, it would be worth it. But he was determined to do more. He wanted to create lasting change. Pulling out his phone, Barron quickly started researching animal shelters and organizations. He saw that there were others who had tried to help, but the problem was so widespread. What if he could start a campaign? What if he could raise enough money to build more shelters, fund more programs, and give these animals a fighting chance? It was a long shot, but Barron didn't see any other option. He was tired of walking past these animals every day and doing nothing. Barron quickly created a fundraising page on social media, sharing his vision with the world. "Help the Street Animals of New York," he titled the campaign. The post went viral almost immediately. Within hours, people from all over the city and even from across the country started donating. Barron couldn't believe how quickly it was spreading. People were sharing his message, commenting in support, and pledging their help. Some donated money, others offered to volunteer their time. Barron was amazed by the outpouring of kindness. He knew he had to keep the momentum going. The donations quickly added up, and within just a few days, Barron had enough to start building shelters across the city. He worked closely with local businesses and animal advocates to make sure the shelters were well equipped and properly maintained. He didn't just want to create a temporary solution, wanted something that would last. Something that would help these animals for years to come. He reached out to veterinarians, pet stores, and animal lovers to gather the supplies and volunteers needed to make it happen. The project grew beyond anything Barron could have imagined. Within a month, several shelters were up and running in different parts of the city. Barron didn't just want to be seen as a hero. He didn't want to be praised or celebrated. What he really wanted was to give these animals a voice. He wanted people to understand that these animals were not just strays, they were victims of circumstance, abandoned by people who didn't care. He wanted to create a movement, a ripple effect that would inspire others to take action too. Barron began organizing adoption events, encouraging families to adopt rather than buy pets. He even partnered with local businesses to promote animal welfare and support the cause. Soon, people were rallying together to help. As the weeks passed, more and more shelters were established. Barron worked tirelessly, visiting the shelters and making sure everything was running smoothly. He helped distribute food, clean the facilities, and spent time with the animals. He wanted to make sure that each animal got the love and attention it needed. He didn't want them to just survive. He wanted them to thrive. Barron's efforts started to catch the attention of local media. He was invited to speak on television and radio programs, sharing his story and encouraging others to get involved. His message was simple: every life matters. People across the country started following his journey, and donations began pouring in from all corners of the globe. Over time, the project grew even larger. Barron teamed up with government officials to create new laws protecting street animals and punishing those who mistreated them. He lobbied for better funding for shelters and animal welfare programs. His efforts were starting to make a real difference. More shelters were built, and rehabilitation centers were opened to help animals recover from injuries and illness. Barron's movement was not just changing the lives of the animals, it was changing the way people thought about them. They were no longer seen as just street animals. They were beings with feelings, with hopes and dreams, just like anyone else. Barron's foundation soon became an international movement. He traveled to other countries to help them create similar programs and shelters. He worked with governments to improve animal welfare laws and spent time educating people about the importance of compassion for animals. He continued to speak at schools, teaching children how to treat animals with kindness and respect. His foundation grew, and eventually, it became a global network of animal advocates working together to create a better world for street animals. One day, Barron visited one of the shelters and saw that same dog he had helped all those years ago. The dog was healthy, happy, and wagging its tail. Barron smiled and walked over to pet it. "You've come a long way, haven't you, buddy?" he said, his voice full of emotion. He knew that the dog's journey wasn't over yet. There were still so many more animals out there who needed help, and Barron wasn't going to stop until every single one of them had a chance at a better life. Looking back, Barron realized that everything had started with a simple act of kindness, a small gesture toward one lonely dog on a cold winter morning. That one moment had sparked a movement that would go on to change the lives of millions. And Barron wasn't done yet. He would continue fighting for those who couldn't speak for themselves, working to create a world where every animal had a safe place to call home.